In part one of this series, I made the structure and all of the drawers for our garage storage system. And now I need to install this into our basement. One thing that I wanted to do before I moved it into the house was to make stops for the drawers. So what I was going to do is make a bunch of strips that will go on the back side of the structure. And we'll make it so that all of the drawers will close to the same point and be flush with the front face. I attach the strips to the inside back of the structure. I thought about letting the drawers just go all the way to the wall behind the structure, but the wall's probably not flat, and if there's anything sticking out from the wall or any kind of bumps, then that will make the faces of the drawers not be very even. I put the staples in the bottoms of all of the drawers, and I got Calvin to carry them into the house. It was supposed to be both kids, but it ended up just being Calvin. I had planned to take the structure apart to take it inside, but I decided that I could keep it all together and we could carry it in as a single unit, and this seemed like it would be easier. And I measured it and it looked like it would fit through the doors into the house. One of the things I wanted to do was to trim the top and bottom runner down to the right length. And once that was done, we could carry it inside. And bringing it in as a complete piece went perfectly until we got to the inside door on the basement. I had to clean out the stuff to make space for the new system. And right as we brought it up to the door, it just didn't quite fit. It was probably less than 1/4 of an inch. So I took the threshold off the door, and that gave us enough room to push it through. Then we could just slide it into place. I had been thinking about, but trying to ignore, how I was going to attach it to the wall. And I couldn't just attach it through the vertical pieces, and the horizontal top and bottom were a little thick, although that would have been possible. But what I ended up doing was making some blocking that would go at the top and bottom. And I could attach those to the back runner on the top and bottom of the structure. Then that blocking could be attached to the wall where the studs are in the wall. And I really only needed a few screws. This blocking I made the same width as the stops for the drawers, so they would fit in that space behind the structure. And I got it exactly where I wanted it. And I shimmed the bottom to make everything level, or plumb, I guess. Then the inspector came in to check everything out. And once it was set in the right place, I could attach it to the wall. Then the drawers could go in, and they still fit. And Bonnie started putting things in the drawers and started to organize all of the stuff that's going in these drawers. It's sort of like having 32 junk drawers now. The other thing I wanted to do was to build a French cleat system next to all of the drawers. And that would be a space for longer things that could hang on the wall. Originally, I was thinking I would make panels of French cleats, meaning I would attach the French cleats to plywood and then hang the plywood on the wall. But I decided that I could just attach the cleats directly to the wall and forgo the panel part, which would save a lot of plywood. I cut a strip and then cut that strip in half to get each cleat. Then I clamped all the strips together and made sure they were fairly in line. And I could cut all of the lengths at once. So this was a little bit more setup, but I think it was faster in the end. And it meant all of the similar lengths were together in a set. So these cleats I want to screw to the wall so they have some strength. And I made a little jig so I could put a screw hole into each end of each cleat in the same place. So once that was set up, I could drill all of those holes. Once I had the ends drilled, on some of the longer ones I wanted a screw in the middle. So I lined up all those cleats and drew a line at the point that I wanted those screws so that they would all be the same. Then I just drilled a hole where that line was. And I can take the cleats inside. So the first ones I set 5 inches above the floor, so I would have space for my baseboard. And I just cut a scrap piece of wood at 5 inches so that all the cleats would be at the same height. Now I did the end by the door first. I screwed a scrap piece of wood to the side so that I could line up all the cleats to that, and that helped. Then I can do the other side, which is kind of a U-shaped space with cleats on 3 sides. So I can do the same thing with my 5-inch spacer to get the first cleats started. I spaced them by putting a scrap piece of wood in between each cleat as I attached them. And I didn't try and divide the total length to try and get them to work out to some height. I just started at the bottom and spaced them 2 inches apart. And where they ended up at the top is just where they ended up. I wanted to put a solid piece on the top of the structure so that we would have a shelf up there for bigger things. I took a piece of my old spoil board off of the CNC table and cut that down to the right size. And that made a nice shelf for the top of the structure. When I get the trim put in, I can screw this piece down to the top. So the trim I made from the maple that I cut up a year ago. It's the maple that got delivered in our driveway. And I milled that maple up into slabs. And they've been drying for a year, which probably isn't quite enough, but I think it'll be okay. So I brought two slabs of this over to the shop. Now it's funny that when you see these slabs of wood, you think there's so much material there, but when you actually cut the piece down to the usable parts, it's actually not that much wood. Which gets me thinking about how much wood is cut off and thrown away when making a nice, clear piece of lumber when you go to the lumber yard. I did the first pass of cuts on the bandsaw, as the wood isn't perfectly straight and it can have some stress in it, so it's a little safer to do it on the bandsaw when compared to the table saw. Once I have it down to smaller pieces, I can joint and plane those pieces. Then they're ready to go on the table saw. The big piece that I was going to use for the baseboard, I resawed on the bandsaw to get 2 pieces out of the piece that I had cut. And once those are cut, I can plane them down to 1/2 inch, I think is what I did. Then I can cut those to the 5-inch width that I want. I had put little shims under the structure to get it level, and I cut off the little bit of extra because they would be in the way of the baseboard. Then I can start making the actual baseboard pieces. I did a quick miter on the corners, which didn't really come out as good as I'd hoped. This is when it'd be really nice to have a bigger compound miter saw, as I have to make the cuts in the shop and then run in and measure and fit pieces in the house and keep running back and forth to put this together. Then I could start working on the other trim. I wanted to do a piece at the 2 ends and a piece around the top to cover the edge of that shelf at the top. I cut up some of the smaller pieces and jointed and planed those, and continued cutting those down to smaller and smaller sections to get to the trim pieces that I needed. I finally got to screwing the shelf on the top down into the structure, and I put the trim around the top. I made a little mistake at this point in that I should have done the vertical pieces first, then set the trim at the top on those vertical pieces. The way I did it, I ended up having to fit the vertical sections in between the baseboard and the top trim, instead of getting the vertical pieces pretty close and then just setting the top trim on top and getting that joint tight by default. I had gotten some label holders for the drawers, and I made a little jig so I could get all of those in the same place on each drawer. There was a jig for the big drawers and a jig for the small drawers. Then Claire made the labels to go in those, and she figured out how to cut them and get them to fit into the little frame. And it worked. And those should be paintbrushes. And they are. The last thing to do is to make some hooks for the French cleats. I took some of the extra cleats that I had made for the walls and cut those down a little bit thinner and attached those to a bigger piece of plywood. Then I could slice that system up into shorter pieces. And that gave me a whole bunch of base plates, I guess, for hooks. I added some nails to those. I sanded each one. I got into a little bit of a system for the sanding. For one kind of hook, I cut some dowels to shorter lengths. Then I could put a hole in the cleat holder and a hole in the dowel and attach the dowel to the cleat. And this will give me a little peg or a little hook to hang things on. Then I bought some hardware as well. I bought some little U-hooks, I guess I'd call them, with a screw on them. So that just takes a hole in the base, and then I can just attach that. And that's good for rakes and shovels and that kind of thing. Now, I made a whole bunch of the base plates, so in the future I'll make more hooks of different kinds. But for now, this works. We're definitely more organized with our garage storage stuff now. And we should be able to find even more to go in this space. Thanks for watching.